16:59.
I get 2,000 also.
Yeah. No, when you say 16, I have to count down after 12, 13, 14.
Just do 12 plus, 12 minus.
I'm minus
I'm
two.
not that smart.
I'm minus 2 from 6.
I need a step stool.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the operational budget meeting for 2024-2025 budget year. This afternoon, Director Matthews will present a draft operational budget. The expectation is that Council will provide direction at the end of this meeting to staff with regards to the disposition of the draft budget. Council has the options to approve the draft budget as presented or recommending changes and deferring approval of the budget. Members of Council were provided with copies of the operational budget on Tuesday, the 28th of May for review prior to this meeting. During the presentation, members of Council are encouraged to ask questions of the CAO or any one of the directors for clarification of budget and details. The meeting is being conducted in Council chambers and is being live streamed on Facebook. No, it's not. On YouTube. And I would be remiss if I did not recognize that today is CAO Jeff Lawrence's birthday. Happy birthday, Jeff.
Happy birthday.
See how this meeting goes?
All right, this meeting is called to order, and I note that all members of council are present, and we do have quorum. As this is a special council meeting, there is one agenda item, the 24-25 operational budget. If I could have a motion to accept the proposed agenda. Councillor Huntley, thank you. Councillor Zabian, thank you. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you. Director Matthews, the floor is yours.
Yes. I was hoping the test would work. Great. Yeah. Better? Great. Okay. You feel free. Great. Thank you. We will go through the budget presentation. As the mayor stated, I did provide some information on Tuesday, and I provided my speaking notes yesterday. So I will be going through those as we walk through the presentation. So those were provided to you just for reference, so you'd have them during the meeting, so you didn't have to take notes as you spoke to me, as I spoke. So we want to get started by thinking about the principles that guide us as we develop our financial operating budget. And really, the pieces that we are concerned with, and hasn't changed from our last year discussion, is around sustainability, while at the same time thinking of growth and leveraging opportunities for growth, being as cost effective as possible, and ensuring that we have affordability when it comes to what we put out there for tax rates. So our starting point for our budget is always our directors and our chief of police looking at what their mandate is, looking at how they will fulfill that mandate, the work they need to do, and then what does it look like for resourcing requirements for that, whether it's people or supplies, capital. And we have already addressed the capital budget, but of course there will be pieces that will feed into this budget that are complementary to that previous discussion. And our goal is certainly to ensure that we have stable tax rates. Variability is something that we try and avoid. So speaking a little further around the planning parameters, what I am trying to highlight here is some of the assumptions that we have that underlie our revenue estimates. From a revenue point of view, we are aware that the cap rate that is applied to our assessments this year was 3.2%. So we know we have a minimum of 3.2% addition in revenue. Our base tax rates, we have assumed are static at 23-24 rates in this preliminary budget. Other items that are identified there, you can see, are based on our 23-24 actuals. If we knew of specific inflation, then we would have embedded that. Return on investments and interest, you will note, we did estimate closer to last year's actual, rather than last year's budget. And our transfers are based on what was provided from an unconditional point of view by the Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing. And then our conditional transfers are based on what we know for current agreements. We didn't, we were conservative, so we didn't say, oh, well, maybe we'll get this money later, so let's put it in and then find out we don't get it. So we were more conservative in that way. From a people perspective, you may recall last year we had talked about vacancies, knowing that if we put new positions in, we couldn't hire them for the full year. So we factored that savings into the budget. This year, all positions, whether new or existing, are budgeted at the full year. So that,
Do you want questions now, or you want to wait till you're done? Whatever you guys want to do.
If you can hold your questions?
Okay.
Yep.
because we will be speaking about each of these within
Okay.
each program, so if you have a specific question on the program, it might fit better there. Counselor Zabian, if that's okay. From a remuneration point of view, our benefits, you can see, are based on the rates that we know of. We have included contract changes for those that we're aware of. We also have included any non-union rate changes based on council-approved pre-approval. Our police contract has expired, but I have included an amount in there as an estimate. So that is covered within the budget. And you will note that we have included staffing costs in there to recruit. We have many people that are in demand, particularly within the police force, with a lot of turnover. So we have maintained our training and learning budgets, even though you may have also noticed that we included the prior year forecast, kind of where we are preliminary audited numbers. So you may see some numbers where our spending last year wasn't as high as what we're budgeting next year, or the current year we're in, actually. However, we know from a succession planning point of view and a recruitment point of view that maintaining some of those resources are helpful in keeping people here, and if we can retain people, it's cheaper as we move forward. On the expenditure side, we have included inflationary pressures. We did review our budgets based on last year and a 5-year average, as well as CPI where CPI was applicable. So it was very much line for line. Each of the team went through and estimated. We didn't do a standard 3% inflationary figure, so it was very much line by line. Our debt assumes our capital investment plan will be financed in the way that was put forward, because we do have to pay half of the interest on our debt for the beginning of the year, within this fiscal year. From a programming point of view, we have maintained our 23-24 levels with some new enhancements. On the recreation side, it does reflect the programming that was previously shared with council, and the costs are aligned with our 5-year average. So that is the overall kind of basis on which we've moved this forward. Before I get into the details of the budget, I do think it's important to consider that when we look at last year's investment, because we did invest in many areas, that we as a leadership team have been successful in making community connections, engaging with diverse groups in our community, listening to and collaborating with our community. We've focused efforts around our housing challenges. All of those pieces were possible because of what we had embedded in the prior year's budget. And certainly our services and programs, based on what we're putting forward, we feel will sustain us on where we are and prepare us for what we need in the future. So that was our intent. We certainly, our goal within this budget was to maintain any staff positions that were embedded within the 23-24 budget. We wanted to ensure that our structure or our leadership structure and our staffing structure aligned with the priority work of the town. So you do see some changes in staffing that we will discuss. We also wanted to make sure that if we had external commitments, that we resourced those as we committed to do so. We discussed during our capital investment planning process that we wanted to enhance the transfers to those reserves. Those are embedded within the plan. And we also wanted to ensure that we maintain the high quality of service that our council and team feel that we are currently able to provide. I was going to start with speaking to the staffing side. It's usually the hottest topic in most budgets, so good to get that one right off.
Director, do you want questions as we do each of these
You are
slides? So
wel-
each
absolutely.
portion?
We
All
certainly
right,
can.
council, if you have any questions with regards to, as we go through each of these slides, please use the facilities, and your questions will be answered in order. Thank you.
Great. So from an FTE perspective, I've broken it down by program and service area. For general administration, we have last year 9.5 FTEs. This upcoming year, we are proposing 10.62, which is an increase of 1.12. The detail around those positions was included in the FTE analysis by program sent to you previously. If you recall, last year, we had within our budget a housing and community partnerships coordinator position that this year you will see we have embedded within the plan for that position to move from recreation and cultural, which is why we'll talk about it a little bit from now, which is why they have a smaller increase. And that has moved to the CAO's office with a request that that position convert to a strategic initiatives coordinator.
Can you, sorry, Director, can you tell me what that is exactly,
That will
that position, or, yeah? Do you want me to buzz in?
Yeah, I do.
Sorry, I apologize.
Probably CAO Lawrence would be best to speak to that, and we will be talking more about it as we talk about the costs as well.
Can we complete the sheet before we start
Oh, I
questions?
thought you said go by each.
No, each sheet is
Yeah,
a
so we can
portion
do
of,
yeah.
Okay. I just
The
wanted to
budget?
keep each
Yeah.
department, because they're all different departments.
So
Sorry.
I will go through, some of them are, kind of go from one department to another, so it might be helpful
Okay.
that way. So if we go, the other piece that's embedded within the 1.12 is the support for the finance team. We do have a retired accountant who is coming in to provide support to us throughout the audit cycle, and that will end in July, so that is to incorporate her up to that point in time. On protective services, you do not see any increase in police and law enforcement overall. However, the sales of service team, there is an increase of 1.8. And that, the budget, those are a group of part-time people who do work performing back checks, and we generate revenue from that. And so myself and the chief incorporated in the budget based on the actual hours that we see people working to generate that revenue. So that is the increase, but it is nominal in comparison to the increase in revenue that you saw coming forward. On the transportation services side, under common services, if you recall last year, we had approved within the budget the addition of a project engineer. Last year, we only expected them to start in August, so we budgeted 0.7. This is to bring it up to that full time. So that is that 0.3. We do also have a change of 1 FTE. And we are anticipating the retirement of our public works lead within 24-25. In our QP collective agreement, it does require us, if that position is replaced, to separate union and management role. So we have to have a supervisor position and a member of the work crew. So to do that would require an addition of a person. that is what that is. And the financial portion of the budget would take the money we're spending now on the one person and negative and add on the new 2 people, and it's the net impact of that financially. So that is what the 1.3 FTEs relate to in transportation. On the environmental development side, we also had put in a senior planner last year. We had them starting partway through the year, so that is 0.25. We now assume that they would be at full-time. We also have, in recreation and cultural, we had included last year a supervisor for facility operations and our neighborhood outreach program coordinator. As well, we knew that the director was taking a leave, so all of those were anticipated in the budget last year, so we have to add them back because everyone's here full-time. So that adds on 1.3 FTEs for admin to add those back. However, we do see, 1.1, yeah. And the 1 FTE is moving from recreation up to, so the net is 0.015. 0.15. I've been looking at numbers too much. 0.15. On the facility side, there's no change. You will have seen the increase in seasonal staff of 3.17. We have started within fiscal '24 a Nature Kids program, which is a 10-month after-school program, and that has a significant investment in FTEs that make up a portion of the 3.17. And then we have included the summer day camp as well. So that's what brings us to the 3.17. That is a significant number of hours because people only work 9 to 10 weeks, and a full-time equivalent is 2,080 hours. So you take 2,080 hours by 8.48, that's the number of hours. And as noted in the FTE analysis, and Director Langell may be able to speak to it further if people have questions, but our seasonal temporary staff is 37 people to create that 8.48 FTEs. So that is it on the FT piece.
All right, thank you very much. Councillor Zabian.
Thank you, Mayor Snow. Give me 1 second here. I have my question and it just left my brain for a second.
Describe what the strategic initiative person is.
Yes, yeah, and what did that morph from? Yeah, thank you.
Sure. That was the housing piece that would have been hired last year. So when acting CAO Patino and myself were both here, we noted that there's no position within administration to look at what are the priorities of council and the CAO, and what it's left is a lot of pieces that were not completed. If you look at PACE, I think the first discussions on that were in 2017-18 with a push in 19, but it never really had a seat to be followed up on. If you look at fire services contract that we're negotiating with Kings County, resources to investigate what's already out there, it has to fall on the CAO's desk or off the side of somebody else's. Minimum standards bylaw is something that I committed to look at in June. There's a couple of councillors around the table that would be, again, having the resources to actually look at 5 or 7 of council's priorities and bring back actionable items. Council RFDs that sit on the docket for months and months. Heritage bylaw would be another one that we would look at where there isn't the staff resources to be able to provide the deliverables, and even setting strategic priorities or strategic planning. That is, we're not creating a new FTA, we're moving an existing FTE up into administration from recommendation to give us some resources to look at what would be at any particular time the 5 to 7 priorities of council and administration, and making sure that we can provide deliverables on it. So that is the idea behind it, and certainly in one form or other, most municipalities would have that piece. In Wolfville, I think it's communications and strategic initiatives, and Annigan it's strategic initiative coordinator. I've seen it called project coordinator. Some municipalities use deputy CAO, but they all in one version or another provide some resources to focus on priorities of council. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, just so I can understand this, somebody was hired last year to do housing, and we were supposed to get a grant, and we didn't get it, correct?
Correct.
So the money didn't come through, and now the position was moved. When was it moved? How, you noted in there, and I,
It's incorporated in the budget as a
Okay.
request.
So having said that, I have utilized the position to start some work on researching fire agreements. I have used the position to bring forward an updated request for decision to council on PACE in July. So although the position, and I've done that through discussions with the director who would have overseen, and through discussions with the employee. The position, that work is valuable work in my opinion, and it's work that has led to, that when the position wasn't there, it's led to frustrations around council in the past. But the challenge is with individuals with very busy plates, trying to run things off the side of different variants just hasn't been able to work. And this is a piece, again, that you will see in most municipalities under one version or another.
okay.
And I would say, again, we didn't ask for a new FTE this year. We looked at where in the organization we could reposition an FTE.
This is the same person, they've
Yes.
been just moved, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have one more question, I don't know if this is the time, I don't wanna ask if it's not the time. You don't wanna get into numbers right now, you just wanna stick on this FTE portion?
Yes, yeah.
No,
Yes.
okay, all right, thank you.
Am I good?
You're good, you can
No,
sit
no,
down.
CAO, before you go, I think one of the things Councillor Zabian mentioned was that position in housing, we were expecting a grant for the entire part of the wages. However, that's not how it rolled out, right?
So we did receive some funding for a portion of the position, I think
Yeah.
25,000.
Yeah.
We didn't receive the housing grant that we applied for, which would have provided the residual of it.
Yeah.
And even with the repurposing of the position, I would still anticipate that a portion of the position would look at housing in our community, but it would be one pillar and not the sole position.
And if I could add to that, within the analysis that I provided, it was about 0.4 from a costing point of view. And although we aren't going to talk specific numbers, I did share on Tuesday an analysis of our real large changes in revenue and expense. And so incorporated in that, it does show that if you, as we discuss those FTEs, the people that were allocated up to full-time from the vacancy factor we had in last year, that along with the 4.4 in funding, that equaled about 111,000 that we would need to fund out of current year revenue. And the new positions that are embedded within there are the 16391.
When, if I
Okay,
can,
and then-
when did we find out that, I guess, funding has stopped, or, I know you said it was budgeted without, we were hoping that was gonna come in, but when did we find out that, say you've got a position in there, whatever the budget amount is, and we're only gonna get a portion of it, when would we have been notified that we lost whatever it was, 24,000 or whatever portion?
What's the housing
The
accelerator
half
fund?
was.
The housing accelerator
Yeah, the
fund.
housing accelerator fund, that was just
Several months ago.
recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was after the new year.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah.
alright.
Yeah.
But we continue to pay this person, we've still got them on staff, so
Yep.
okay, thank you.
And as you can see from our financial report that we provided, including the prior year, Director Langell would have been working with me on forecast to ensure that we could find money elsewhere to fund that position once we knew. So we were managing that throughout the year to ensure we didn't come in over budget.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just before I sit down, and it's an important piece of this budget to me. Like, in previous years, if there were vacancies or if a position was only going to be filled for a half a year, we would only look to find the budget for the half a year, and what that always meant in the next year is you were paying catch-up for the other half of the year. Anything that is in this budget, regardless of when it is scheduled to start, is budgeted for the full year, so you won't have to find that money in future years to make up for half years or quarter years or 3/4 of a year. And it's a big piece in what we tried to build in for stabilization.
Thank you.
Thanks, CAO. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. So my question was around that position as well, but so when the CAO mentioned it could be referred to as sort of a deputy CAO and the valuable work attached to it, so that makes a little bit more sense to me. Where this person will be still doing some work in homelessness, will there be any sort of grants applied for a portion thereof of the salary?
We're always looking
Yeah.
to seek grant funding, not necessarily for the salary,
Right.
but you remember the $100,000 for stormwater that came
Yeah.
forward? Well, she would have been one of 2 individuals on administration that sourced out and found that, so we're always
Okay.
looking. And again,
Yeah.
if you have some capacity outside of off of the side of your desk to look for these opportunities,
Yeah.
then you're more aware of what may or may not be out there. So even on that side of it, and I didn't have the answer at council, but the grant is 50-cent funding, so we will be looking for $50,000 towards the $100,000 stormwater management.
Okay, great, thank you. I just have one more question. It's with respect to protective services, the sale of service, the 1.8.
Yep.
That's back check, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Councillor Gerard.
Thank you, Worship. Just a quick question about the Public Works lead. We have to hire a new member for the work crew. Are we replacing the supervisory position as well?
Yes.
Or is that currently,
And Director Bell can add to this, but we currently have an individual that does frontline work as well as the lead supervisor, and we can't have a person doing
Yep,
both
no,
of those,
absolutely.
and would have overtime and all those other costs associated with that because they're doing the two.
Yep.
So it would be hiring for a public
Public
works
Works manager,
supervisor or
supervisor.
manager,
Yep.
and then replacing the frontline work crew
Yep.
team member unionized position. So it nets out to a certain dollar value, but is really a new position.
nope, and that's,
Does
I
that
just.
Answer the question?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
just wanted to
great.
make sure that we were,
We are. So we're really increasing our capacity somewhat from a management point of view. However, there was a lot of overtime and other pieces that would be able to offset some of the adjustments. So
yep, no, that's perfect.
did I answer that fully, Director Bell?
Perfectly.
Okay. You versed me well. Great.
Councillor Maxwell.
Well, thank you. Just one question. I noticed on the FTE sheet that you gave us, there's a 0.15 position difference for admin and recreation. I'm just wondering what that is.
Sure. So that is the, I shouldn't have flipped that page over. So that is the net of what I mentioned earlier. So there were 0.75. So we had 3 people last year that were budgeted for part of the year. So we needed to add 0.75 for them to come in. We also had the recreation admin, the housing and community partnerships person, so we added in their 0.4. So that was added into recreation, and then we removed the housing coordinator and moved it up. So the net of all of that is 0.15.
Okay, great,
So
thanks.
it's just a little, yeah. Okay,
Yeah, thank you.
you're very welcome.
Are there
And-
any further questions with regards to our FTE changes by program? Deputy Mayor.
Sorry about this,
Okay.
Mayor. The seasonal temporary.
Yes.
So, I know that you had mentioned the Nature Kids
Which is
program.
a huge program, yep.
Okay, and that's how many? And it's for a shorter span of time, right?
39 weeks.
39 weeks.
So it is a 10th-month program.
So it's nothing to do with the summer camps?
Director Lanchel could maybe answer that.
Okay, sorry.
It is in addition to the
Okay.
summer camps,
I'm
however,
just
I
trying to
think
make it
there-
work in my head, that's
there
all.
is some staff that may overlap, so.
I
think the number was around 2.2, 2.3 was for the nature kids. So it's all, we have 7 part-time staff that now do after-school programming with KCA in partnership. So that's a 10-month program. We
Okay.
started that in February. You might recall back in
Yes.
January CAC.
Yeah, I do.
This is something that we fill out, or that we are at capacity at already.
Okay.
And so we find as a department, it's very valuable in the community. It was a pilot program, and we'd like to continue it,
Okay.
is kind of where we're going with it. The other remaining portions would be made up of our summer outreach staff starting earlier to be able to have Recreation Month in June
Okay.
and offer those programming.
Gotcha, okay,
Yes.
that's very helpful, thank you.
Yes, and he was spot on, it's 2.2.
Great, yeah, thank you.
Counselor Sabian.
Thank you, Mayor Snow. Director Langell, thank you. What's your capacity for that program?
For the
nature,
the nature kids?
yeah,
It sits on Laura's desk.
okay,
So right now it's sitting with Becca, but going to Laura's desk. It is a lot of work, and that's why we have partnerships with it. So we have.
what's the,
How many
like, how many
students?
students can you take is what I meant?
Oh, sorry, we
Yeah.
have 7.
7?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or sorry, seven instructors, and
right.
then we have 48 kids.
48 kids,
Yeah.
oh, that's what I meant, yeah, sorry.
Instructors,
Yeah.
48.
And that staff, that's part-time just from September until June?
Correct.
None of those people are involved in the summer programming, or do any of them overlap, or?
Some of them are going to have applied for
Okay.
the summer camp.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes.
Counselor York.
Thank you. The Nature Kid programming, did that have a government portion from the province as well
Did.
to help offset the costs? And if it did, does that continue into the next school year as well?
It does, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so we have an operational grant,
Okay.
somewhere's around about $30,000, $40,000 worth of
Great.
grants that come in.
Thank you.
And then we have we get fees from
Right.
the
Thank you.
students' families as well, and it actually nets out to a net revenue.
Oh.
Small amount, but a net revenue, so it's funded, fully funded.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Which we'll see as we move forward, but, yeah. No, that's great.
All right, Director, floor is
I'm
yours
glad I
again.
anticipated your questions by putting that in the report. Great. Okay. So that moves us to looking at some of the major costs for our external commitments and partnerships. So the big change you'll see there is our mandatory transfer for the school board, or formerly called the school board, but Annapolis Valley Regional Center for Education. That has gone up by $296,952 this year. We have our commitment to the Kentville Development, I don't know what C stands for.
Limited.
Okay, corporation, thank you. So that has changed this year by virtue of their contract. They had a one-time special payment last year that has discontinued, plus they have an inflation built in. Our inspection services is significantly higher cost than what was in the budget, so we've brought that up to what we're paying for inspection services. It's no change in the service level, it's just the cost. King's Transit Authority, last year, in the 395, we budgeted for an amount for capital that we don't need to budget for this year, which is the major change there that caused them to go down. The Volunteer Fire Department, that amount would be a difference of 81,000. That would be for operations along with the area rate. The Valley Waste Resource Management is a difference of 43,000, which is fairly significant. We know our debentures, we had some fall off, which we talked about during capital, so we don't have to pay as much principal this year. And Kings Point to Point, it wasn't a large dollar value, but in case you had questions, I added last year's budget was based on 22-23. So even though it looks like a large increase, it's really getting caught up for 2 years, and a significant portion of their work is really around using vehicles, and the costs of, those operating costs have been escalating over the last 2 years. So we'll talk about some of those areas further as we move into the detailed budget, but some significant ups and downs, I think, in those areas that I'm grateful that some of those agencies that we work with have seen a reduction. I also wanted to just highlight overall that and I believe it came up in previous meetings, that the province had made changes to some of the grants and the transfer requirements. Our capacity grant went from a budget last year of 167.8 to 339,353. So that is frozen for 5 years. It is an increase of almost 172,000. We also no longer have to pay for housing and corrections. Those two amounts are highlighted there. That totals savings of about 348,000. If we look at our mandatory transfer to AVRCE, it pretty much washes that out. So the great thing is we don't have to find that out of other general revenue, because there are a lot of other pressures we have, but it really didn't create a huge amount of capacity given that large increase on the school board side. Okay.
Are there any questions with regards to these two slides? Councillor Gerard.
Inspections and 911. I
Yes.
assume that's what we contract out, or at least the inspection
Yes.
side to the county?
Yes.
What is the breakdown on, and I guess what's included in 911?
Looking at Director Bell. We pay a fee, I believe, I can double check, but I believe it's a fee for communications. So we pay for a portion of the dispatch, I believe, no? I'm looking that way for help. I can try and, I'll do a double check and get back to you, but I'm pretty sure that's what the bill said. So I just have to pull that. And for inspection services, we're charged for a portion of the employee, and that portion is not on the bill, so I'm not sure. Director Bell, are you aware of what?
Used to be
The-
around 40, wasn't it? 40s? Well, that's a couple years ago, though.
Yes,
Probably
it's more than that now. But I'm not sure what percentage that is. But it is a set amount that we get charged quarterly from the county. Would you like me to look into those two pieces?
Yeah, if you
Yeah.
don't mind, but
Not
is
at all.
there, so there's no, I'm gonna call it a usage fee?
No, it is absolutely
just a
just a
one-
portion of
Okay.
an individual's or a group's salary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Deputy Mayor.
At least that's what the bill says.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I think with the 911, because I'm going back to our first term, but I think, because we used to use Valley Communications, right? Then we got away because it was less expensive and, yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
that's where my head is. I
Remember
just
that.
need to make sure it's allocated to that.
Yeah.
Account.
I didn't see the correlation between inspection.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
because they're on a group bill from the county, so
Yeah.
they're aggregated together for that
So
reason.
the 911.
Oh, sorry.
Isn't actually, like,
No.
you're talking about the police change.
Yeah.
The dispatch is
Yeah.
from Bridgewater. That's
from
a
Bridgewater,
different
that's not-
line.
Yeah,
That's
a
not
totally
this.
separate thing.
I
This is
think
911
This is
services.
911
Oh,
service.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's what I was saying, sorry.
I'm getting them blended. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah. The revenue capacity grant, so I need a little bit, sorry, I need a little bit more dispo around that.
So that, and I know Mayor Snow knows more about than I do, it is an unconditional transfer that comes to us. So it's grant from the province for revenue with no
Snow Guard?
conditions attached.
So prior to CERMGuard, we were
Yeah.
getting 167,000.
Okay.
After CERMGuard, and they did all the jiggering around,
Yes.
we're now up to 339.
Okay,
However,
yes.
when you look at everything, and the one thing that I'm going to say that the director hasn't shown us is, if you look at our housing actuals, our housing actual was 97,573, and our corrections was 88,389. So it was actually higher than what we're showing there, so we actually have less money than what we
Right.
sort of had, even with the increase.
Yes.
Because of what's happened with education.
Okay.
And the other thing about education is, and especially for those of you that are gonna be around this horseshoe ongoingly, is that this is still on Schedule A. is they have committed, as part of CERMGUARD, to look at our education fees, so.
I thought so, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
So, but this is the biggest bump that we've
Right.
seen in
Okay.
years. And
Okay.
as you will recall, Wanda actually put the, Director Matthews actually put the number in here. We have 855 students in the town of Kentville, which is really wonderful, because when we first started here in 2016, there were only, we were in the 622 students. So we're
Yeah.
855 now, and our transfer is $2,459 per student back into the province. Now, the other thing that we have to lobby here is the fact that our taxpayers are paying this fee with after-tax dollars. So in effect, you know, taxpayers are being gouged by our provincial government on this one. And this is one of those ones where it would be better if the province was charging directly to the taxpayers as a provincial tax rather
Oh,
than,
absolutely.
than a property tax. But,
Yeah.
you know, it's not like that. So if anyone ends up on the CERMGUARD, and I'm lobbying for this right now, if anyone ends up on the CERMGUARD committee, these are one of the things that you should be looking at.
Yeah.
Because this is a huge increase, and
sure
it's basically negated the fact that they almost doubled what they were paying us.
Yeah.
And,
So, yeah.
and last year, our change, we went from 1,622,000 to 1,805,000. So it was 183,100 last year.
Yeah.
And so it's gone up another 110,000 above
Yeah.
last year's increase.
And that AVRC, like, none of this is negotiable, yeah,
No,
exactly.
no, we just pay it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, that's
All
helpful.
right, Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you. Staying on that same topic, is it just the increase in the number of students that drove that figure up? It's not just that?
No.
Two pieces.
Yeah.
It's our uniform assessment
Yes?
and the number of students. And it looks like CIO Lawrence has something to add.
Okay. yeah.
Sure. First, the capacity grant is a combination of what used to be the $50,000 towns grant and the equalization grant. That's what the previous number would have been. Now it's melded into the capacity grant. And we are the only education center that is funded on a per student basis. All of the others are just based on uniform assessment and your percentage of uniform assessment. When you do the math, it's pretty much a wash for us as to which way it would go. Kings County is disadvantaged by this, and Wolfville is advantaged by this formula. But as we move forward and as our student population continues to go up, it's something that we should potentially monitor, because it may flip to where it's more advantageous to us to follow just a strict uniform assessment model. But when we ran the numbers this year, they're almost identical.
Yeah. And our student population represents 10.65% of the total. So we had an increase of 46 students, or 6%. So, okay.
Councillor Maxwell, did you have anything else?
No.
Okay, good. Councillor Zabian.
Thank you, Mayor Snow. Director Matthews, it's probably in here and I just missed it. What does 1 cent of residential and commercial tax?
It's not in there. We can
Oh.
talk about it when we get to taxes.
Okay, that would be nice to know.
In
Thank
the
you.
presentation. You're
Okay,
welcome.
thank you.
All
Okay.
right, Director?
Overall, the summary budget that has been provided to council will have a total revenue stream of 17,353,316, and an offsetting expenditure to equate to that. So it is a 10.4% overall increase in revenue and expenses. And I have provided, I don't have the details to put on the screen because they're very tiny, but we have provided council with a summary proposed budget along with some details. So I thought I would walk through some of the highlights of that, which I have provided to you in those speaking notes provided to you just yesterday, so you have those in front of you. So if we look at our revenue stream, you will see that our taxes increase is about just under 1.2 million, so 1,175,000. We know that we have an increase in our overall tax revenue, which I have a slide later that will answer Councillor Zabian's question and give a little more detail around that. We also know that our fire area rate, there was a ratepayers meeting and in the, I think just a couple months ago, and the rate will change from 0.0397 to 0.045 per $100 in assessment value, which increases our revenue collection, but is an offsetting expense later on, because that does have to go back out to them. Our hydrant area rate, which is established by the Nova Scotia Utilities and Review Board during our water rate application process, that remains the same this year. Our current calculation that would suggest that the minimum, we would be under the minimum, so we do have to collect the minimum. However, the rate, of course, would change if our assessment values change. And those two pieces are transferred to the Kentville Volunteer Fire Department and the Kentville Water Commission. So although the revenue has gone up, it's not revenue that we have available to us. You will also notice in the proposed budget that you have provided that our payments in lieu of taxes have changed. I've provided in the discussion document information around how that is calculated. But overall, our current budget is set at last year's actual receipt level, and it has gone up, as was indicated in our forecasting over the last couple of months. Services provided to other governments has not changed dramatically, and it continues to be sharing services with Kings County and ASA Common Agreement that we have for our criminal intelligence service. From a sales of service perspective, that has changed by a significant amount. Much of the services that are embedded in there, we provide to our own agencies or property owners. Most of them come through the Public Works area. Sanitary Sewer and Kentville Water Commission are the recipients of those charges, and therefore we would have, for the Water Commission, revenue assigned to that. If those expenditures go up, our revenue go up, so there is an offset there. I spoke about the police service where we perform back checks, and there is a fee for that service. The budget has been fairly conservative. We have increased that budget to better reflect what our actual experience has been, and as I mentioned, we've included the staff hours that would be required to generate that level of income. So that has impacted that sales of service number by the 10.6%. We talked about the unconditional transfer. Our conditional transfers last year, we did not have anything there for federal or other, but our recreation department has been successful in receiving federal funding through Canada Summer Jobs and the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association, so that's what those funds are there for. They have been confirmed before the budget presentation. We also, you will also see that there's a reduction from the provincial side, and that is that housing position that we thought we would get the funding for. So the revenue has been reduced there associated with that. On other revenue and owned services, there is an increase in a few areas. Interest is one that has been fluctuating based on, of course, based on our prime rate. We had not increased that last year, not because we weren't sure where interest rates would go. This year, as you can see, if you look at the actual compared to budget, we're still fairly conservative. We haven't budgeted for the level of last year, but we can't predict where interest rates will go this year or what our bank balance might look like. So we have increased, but not to the same level as actual. Our budget for ICE rentals would be the other biggest change. I just wanted to assure you that our actual rentals are expected to maintain at last year's level. However, we've always over budgeted on that side, so that is why there's a reduction of $35,000. It's not a program change or a fee change. The return on investments includes the dividend we get from the Kentville Water Commission of $100,000. And we also are the recipients of $460,000 from our perpetual fund. Those go in that account. The budget actually showed a higher value transfer from the investment committee, even though that's what they've committed to. So we've made the budget reflect the 460, not 530. And we have included an additional 100,000. The investment committee has committed to create that additional capacity to come in, and you'll see it going out to fund capital when we look at financing and transfers. So that was the commitment that investment committee made. So from a revenue point of view, those were the pieces I wanted to highlight. So would we like to take questions for revenue first before we move to expenses?
Yeah,
here?
please.
Okay.
All right, Deputy Mayor.
Yes.
It's actually about expenses. But I'm gonna ask something too about the ROI, the 660,000. That 100,000 that comes from the Water Commission, that's reoccurring, right?
That's
That
every year.
happens every year, and it will happen every year until
Forever.
forever.
Forever, as long as it's approved through our, I see,
Oh, sorry.
our CAO wishing to speak.
So we're required to file any rate applications with the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board.
Yeah.
And that 100,000 will be included in the submission. It is considered a reasonable return on rate base.
Okay.
I don't anticipate it will change, but again, the utility is subject to approval on any rate application of the UARB. So there's always the potential that they could alter that amount.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Councillor Sabian.
Thank you, Mayor Snow. Director Matthews, when you, on the revenue side, there's no, I don't see it there unless it's somewhere else, any anticipation on the revenue from D-transfer tax or?
No, and that is because I believe the wish of council was for that to go to capital, not
Okay.
operating.
Okay,
So it would, as that is received, it would go into a capital reserve
okay,
that would then be available for utilization when we bring our capital investment plan forward.
okay, thank you,
So that's not incorporated.
okay,
However, our perpetual fund, the way that that goes is that they provide that to town operations, and then town council can decide how that's used. That's
Okay.
why it kind of came in, the extra 100 came in, and then you'll see it going out as a transfer to capital reserve.
okay.
Okay?
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, moving right along.
Moving on to expenses. So, unless you
Oh.
have.
It's not a question, it's just a comment, and Director Matthews alluded to it around the extra 100,000 that we're gonna be taking, from the portfolio on a per annum basis, and, we had lengthy conversations with our investment advisor about that, and he feels very comfortable that, having that extra 100,000 is going to not be an issue, and I think, that's gonna be a really good thing for us, and, being able to transfer that over to capital. But as the director said, that 100 has to go through the operating first, and then, so I think that's, I'm happy about that. Yeah, thanks.
All right.
So on the expenditure side, when we talked about our planning parameters, I did describe what is in there for remuneration. So our staffing changes, our rate changes are all embedded within there in our contracts. So I won't go through that in any detail, but I'm happy to answer questions on that piece. So my thought was we could focus around the operating expenditure side. It's an election year, as everyone knows, so we have included within the admin budget a $51,000 amount for anticipated expenditures. That is the amount we had in our reserve set aside, so those two match. But we have also included within administration amount for technology, for a changeover of technology and for staffing. Those values, as noted in this report, are 16,000 and about 20. So 87,000 overall is what is estimated. If we deviate from that, we would be bringing forward that to council for discussion and decision around any funding surrounding that. We also, if you recall last year, we accrued for our vacation liability, and Each year, the change in that then has to be recorded in the statement of operations. So we've estimated in the budget $20,000 would be about what we would need annually for that balance. So that is embedded within the expense as a new item. We've also incorporated an increase in technology. Some of that is the operational side of the investment in the servers and items included in our capital investment plan. It's also providing some support to maintain the current service levels that we are using. So you'll see the increase in that. That is also where that 20,000 is for council technology. That's why it looks rather large this year at 23% increase. We've also included the accessibility assessment. So that is a non-recurring fee, something we'll have to address this year, but not to continue into the following year. We have increased our legal and audit budget by about 30,000, which is significantly less than what our actual was, but we are feeling that putting a smaller amount in would be reasonable in the coming year. If we deviate from that, as in any of these expenses, then we would have to address that through forecast. Also by motion of council, you had asked that we transfer money for Safe Seniors into the core police budget from the community grants. So that has happened. I've also incorporated the expense within the budget around our low-income tax exemption that was approved by council a couple of months ago. So that $16,750 is embedded as an extra cost. So those are the areas within admin that I wanted to highlight. Would you like me to go through each area first? That really the way?
Yeah,
Yes, okay.
let's do that.
Some for protective services, I talked about our staffing add-ons. However, there was a request for an additional crisis navigator position that the police commission had improved and had looked to have that included within the budget. I know that the chief is seeking alternate funding sources for that position, so we have not included it there. If we are successful, then that could be something we bring back to council as a forecast item to deal with at a later date, because we are aware that that is out there as a potential. I have also identified for you that if you were to look at the details that were provided yesterday for the specific areas within protective services, it looks like they didn't need any more money this year for operations, but that's because the credit for correction services sits there of 87.2. Their expenses needed to be lifted by about 84,000. So it basically looks like a wash, but I wanted you to be aware the expenses were rising, and a lot of that is insurance and vehicle. It's very much those inflationary costs and trying to get the budget to better reflect that 5-year actual average. We also talked about fire protection, so you see that is a 16% increase. So those expenditures will be there as well. And those are the highlights for protective services. Transportation services, we talked about the staffing piece. However, in addition, because we sell those services to other agencies and to private people, and then we sell those services to other departments, so there's this internal allocation that happens. There were some changes around that, so you'll see negatives on one department going to positives on another department, but they all net out. So even though you see ups and downs, it's just the assignment. It didn't change the overall FTEs that we're resourcing, so I wanted to share that. We are, and I've noted that in my narrative as well when we talk about Parks and Recreation, because those are the two areas that have those allocations. Our approach moving forward is to direct charge people. So if you work in the arena for 20 weeks and then you work in parks for 30, let's just charge you to arena and parks and not do these negatives and positives. So we started to transition with some of those positions this year and hope that all of those will change over for next budget year. We also have included the undertaking of a stormwater management plan, and that budget is in there at $100,000. That we also have looked at all of the detailed line-by-line road transportation items, and Director Bell and I reviewed the 5-year experience, and he went line by line and made those adjustments to really reflect what it is we're currently spending and what the new costs are for items. So those are in there, and there's ups and downs, but with internal allocation, they basically wipe each other out. So that is it for transportation. On the environmental health services side, we talked, those are all really our partnering agencies, and we've talked about the first few pieces. Environmental development does include planning and zoning and our community development side. We talked about the senior planner position. So even though there's no change in position, there is an additional cost because we converted that position to a director level. So that cost is embedded within the plan along with bringing it up to full-time. We have, our development officer is on maternity leave, and so we have ensured that her salary is embedded within the budget, and we've just taken the difference between the compensation we would spend and what our C&D contract is and budgeted for the difference. So that's the 11,250. If you wondered why they cost us a little, it's because I didn't want to budget for it twice. That's why. We have also included a proposed engagement in our secondary planning, and that would be a cost of $75,000, which is an increase of $25,000 over last year. And as you recall, that $50,000 that was budgeted for last year, given our staffing complement, we weren't able to move that forward. So that wraps up what I wanted to highlight within that program. If we move to recreation and cultural services, we talked about their FTEs. The internal allocation impacts them as well. It is a little more complicated, I think, in the recreation side because of the way the internal allocations worked. So we have really gone through and said we're not allocating 1% of somebody and 2%. We want to allocate where there's a big chunk of work happening within another area. So those numbers are kind of up and down, a little more so than you'll see elsewhere. And because of, but I can assure you that they all net to zero. They're color-coded and balanced. We have included within the budget arena facilities condition assessment, the completion of that work, and that increased the budget as noted by $14,000. We talked about Nature Kids, so you can see that's embedded within the narrative. We have included the cost of summer day camps, and those are at a cost of $32,500 with offsetting revenue at about $17,500. So it is a loss for that 5-week program. However, there are other programs and services that came in at a net revenue that offset those costs in the budget as is presented. We also, when you look at the recreation facilities budget, there's a change there of $37,200, and I've added that with the Parks Division and Trees expenditure because they kind of go hand in hand, and the people are somewhat shared from a payroll perspective. And that increase was $38,000, and that's mostly driven by the compensation and expense. Some of that is the allocation. The other piece that's embedded within there is the support for pumpkin people. The current person that did that work retired. That was always charged to economic development. There's still a charge in economic development, but it won't be the person working in parks doing that. So then their costs couldn't get allocated out, so their costs are higher, but it's no more people for that area. It does create some capacity, of course, for that team member to do other work. And we had the seasonal hires in there as well to support our park space management. We talked about education, and I believe I did share the details around the increases, and Mayor Snow added that it is $2,459 per student. We then looked at the detail for financing and transfers. So although the budget process, operating reserves are generally reduced at the same time as we move money in, so you'll see, we always saw in the revenue about $240,000 coming in, and then on the expense side, so much going out. during our capital review, we knew that we wanted to increase our reserve levels because they were insufficient moving forward. So what you directed management to do is to maintain the 423,100 going to the general capital reserve, so that's embedded there. We also were asked to increase the transfer capital from revenue for police vehicles to 77,000, for public works equipment to move to 215,000. And we also spoke of the 100,000 that will come from the perpetual fund to general capital. Those together net to a $303,000 increase moving to reserves, but would be an expense to the operating budget. So a significant utilization of increased revenue to support our capital investment plan. We have also looked at our operations side and said, if we know that we are anticipating a preliminary operating fund surplus is around over 400 and some thousand, much of that is because our revenues exceeded what we anticipated, that we could see using a portion of those funds, and what's embedded in the plan is for the specific projects that are non-recurring in one time that were started last year or were intended to happen last year. So our secondary planning, our arena, our accessibility, our stormwater management, that we would pull money from operating reserve in to cover that. And so those funds are shown in here as coming into, and that coincidentally matched what we normally would just do a general allocation for last year. But it was more intentional around, let's not move money in unless we have to, and here were some specific non-recurring costs that allow us to ensure that our revenue streams can sustain our ongoing operations, that we're not tapping into those reserves consistently. We also looked at our long-term debt, and we talked about that as a major change. I'm sure council is aware, but wanted to highlight that the interest on any debt that we receive will be charged off to that department based on the infrastructure and equipment that's purchased. So we've anticipated that, and I didn't focus on that within each individual department area because it's not really within their control. So that is a highlight of each of the program areas, and I do have another slide here that I thought may be of interest before I take questions. We have the percentage spent by department or major expenditure area as a percentage of our total spend. So education, housing, and transit. Now housing is nothing next year. I probably should have changed that name, my apologies. So it's education and transit. That is 14.3% of our overall cost. That number exceeds our recreation percentage of 11.8. To put it in perspective, the same as administration at 13.78. Transportation at 14.4. Our protection services are 21.6, and that excludes the fire area rate and the hydrant area rate, as well as the KPS sales of service. I've broken those out separately and together on your report. Our solid waste is 4.4%, and our debt principal is 4.9. So there are a significant number of expenditures at a very substantial percentage of our overall spend that are outside of our, that are less discretionary, I will put, as others. So thought that that might be helpful to keep things in perspective.
Thank you,
Now
Director.
I'm happy to take questions
All
along
right,
with my
thank you.
colleagues.
Councillor Zabian.
Thank you, Mayor Snow. Director Matthews, I have two questions. Under administration, the remuneration, the budget last year, the approved budget was 514,000. But the actual, the unaudited one is 444,000. But this year, we're proposing 543,000.
Right.
What, is that because of the director change? What's encompassed in that?
So that would be those FT changes we talked about. So
Okay.
part of it would be moving the position from recreation to.
Okay.
So if we look at last year, we
Yep.
had gaps
Mhm.
within there. So it would include the CAO finance, all of those pieces. So the extra 0.12, the extra 1
Yeah.
would be included in there, along with any salary changes, cost of living. So all those pieces work out to that change.
Okay. And under the, I just want to make sure, and I'm sorry for asking the same question twice. Under the general administration, the same question, so that change of the 109,000, that's that extra person and
It's a
any changes?
combination of all of those
Okay.
pieces.
And CAO changes and all
The
that stuff?
CAO
Yeah.
change,
Okay.
that person, the 0.12 in finance, the change in WCB rate, all of those pieces are added in there, the cost of living increase.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay, all right, thank you.
yeah, you're very welcome.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. So I like this slide because it really gives us a sense of what percentage of these expenses, or what percentage of the budget and the expenditure part of the budget is really a portion that we can play with, right?
Right.
Like it's a very small portion of the expenses that are, I don't know what the word is, it's been too long days.
Non-discretionary, I would
Non-discretionary,
say.
yes, thank you,
I
yeah.
think in the past, we might have called it a mandatory versus non-mandatory.
Yeah,
And from, and this is my personal point of view, but I think in looking at it, you have contracts with other agencies.
mhm,
You could break them, I suppose,
Mhm.
but if it isn't your intent to break them,
mhm.
then that really is
It's like a fixed
non-discretionary.
cost
It's kind of
almost.
it's a fixed
Yeah.
cost for the duration of those contracts.
Right.
The same with debt principal. We don't have control necessarily over a fire area rate or a hydrant area rate or the transfer for education and so on. So putting some of those pieces there puts in perspective that debt is only 5% of total, but it's still 5%.
So that's a
Right.
great segue, because I
Yeah.
was going to ask about that piece. So for a $17 million budget, like that debt piece, the 4.9,
Yeah.
is that in line with where it should be? Could it be higher?
I don't have the history for that, but maybe
Yeah,
our
that's just-
CAO may
and
have some perspective,
But
given his
it-
experience.
Because I think a lot of us are getting a lot of questions around that
Yep.
debt piece and how much is okay and how much
Yep.
isn't, and what percentage
Yeah.
we like
So
to see. So I'm just thinking more on
Certainly,
that
our
type of work.
financial condition
That's-
indices
yes.
will guide how much a percentage of long-term debt we can have if we
Right.
want to stay within that low-risk area.
Exactly.
And that subsequently then impacts the operating budget for the repayment of principal.
For sure.
So I don't know it, there isn't an FCI that I'm aware of that speaks to the principal repayment
Okay.
within the operating fund, but it does speak to, but
I just wasn't sure if there was or not. Yeah.
I'll
No,
lean
it-
on CAO's
The
experience.
province's financial indicators look at debt servicing, including principal and interest, and you would have saw as part of the capital presentation that we're in the low, but we're marginally in the low and approaching moderate for debt servicing.
Approaching moderate, yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
And so, yeah, that is the principal side of it coming out of operations, but it
Yeah.
doesn't include the debt servicing. And the other piece is that a lot of the money we've borrowed up until now has been at a lower interest rate
Of
than what
course.
we would anticipate borrowing on at least in the next 2 to 3 years.
Absolutely, okay, thank you for that,
Yes,
that's
is
helpful.
correct.
Yeah, that's great, thank you.
Councillor Sabia.
Thank you, Mayor Snow. Director, can I ask you what 1 cent buys us now, or do you want to, or is it coming up?
It's coming up.
Good segue.
I'm keeping the anticipation.
All right,
We're
okay.
coming right into it.
I'll wait then.
Okay. So moving right into tax revenue. We have, in looking at the reports that we receive from Property Valuation Services, our residential resource taxable assessment grew by 15.9%. Last year, it was 14.96. You may recall our cap is at 3.2, which is much less than last year's 7.7. In looking at our number of, residential and resource properties in comparison this year over last year to how many are capped, this year we're at 80% cap versus 77.2. So we do have 2,321, and our capped are 1,896. So a significant number of capped. Of course, our revenue is a combination of assessment growth as well as new construction and property sales, which is standard. So if we, so the next slide will describe what we have included within the budget for tax rates. Our residential base rate is in there at 1.4262, and it's in blue because it's the same as where we were last year. However, our fire area, or our rate, that's, sorry, it's spell checked. I even had other people read it. Fire area rate, we read what we want to see, is 0.0397 this year, and it is 0.045 next year based on that ratepayer meeting decision. Our hydrant area rate, the dollars we're trying to collect remain the same, but our assessment value has gone up, therefore the rate has gone down. Because you're bringing in, you have a higher assessment number that you're spreading that money, 400 and some thousand over, so that will go down. And our economic development levy will go up, and that is to recover the costs associated. And I will share that it will look worse when we go into commercial because they pay a higher percentage. Last year's rate was based on maintaining the revenue level the same. However, that wasn't where our expenditures were. So that is what is currently built in the budget. So it would be a change in residential rate by 0.0022 or 0.1%. If we look at our total taxable assessed value for residential, commercial, and resource, that totals $741,825,300. So that is what that assessed value is. So if we were to say what would it be for 1 cent, it'd be about $74,183. Based on that assessment. Now, of course, there's ups and downs, people who would be exempt from tax but pay us in lieu, but that's generally speaking, based on that assessment value, what a 1 cent would be. What I've calculated for you is to say, if you had a $100,000 value home, your tax bill last year would have been $1,526. Assuming you're capped, you'd be at $1,032. So your bill would be $1,577, which is an increase of $51. If you look at your average taxable assessment, so we do get that number from Property Valuation Services. Last year it was $224,079. This year $236,198. The tax bills with last year's rate and the proposed rate for this year would change by $190 if you had that average value home. Okay. If we move to commercial, our taxable assessments went up 11.29% this year. Last year, you can see just under 10. We've maintained the commercial base rate at 3.2962. And our fire area rate, of course, remains the same as our hydrant area rate. Our economic development levy is distributed more towards commercial and industrial, less towards residential. So the increase for the economic development levy is higher. Here, it would go from 0.1087 to 0.1177, showing going from 3.5034 to 3.5143. So that is the commercial side, and we do not get an average for commercial. So just, that's what it would look like. It's $12 on 100,000, so. But commercial assessments are, of course, in many cases, certainly larger than a residential would be, but it gives you at least a number for a sliding scale. Those are the slides that I had around tax revenue. I'm so happy to take questions on that piece before I wrap up.
All right, Councillor, are there any further questions? All right.
In closing, I wanted to highlight that we have presented a balanced budget. We have put forward a stable base tax rate, knowing that there are other rates that we don't necessarily have the maneuverability around. All positions, whether new or existing, are budgeted at a full year, regardless of whether there would be potential vacancies due to a delayed hiring process. And this really ensures that over time, our tax base can sustain the staffing level that's there, as CAO spoke to earlier. We have, as I've noted, included in our compensation, anything we're anticipating, outstanding contracts we're negotiating and so on. If there's any deviation from what's finally signed to what there is now, I have noted that there are a few operating reserves that might be able to access that if there is a change, so that there isn't a huge risk built into the budget for that for you. We know that planning for the future of the town really makes gathering information and expertise a priority. And therefore, within the plan, we have a stormwater management, accessibility, secondary planning, and the facility feasibility to be undertaken in the 2025 year. That has been incorporated. Those do have an offsetting reserve funding. And we know that those reports and recommendations will build the foundation for us moving forward. We have sustained our service levels within departments and made strategic investments to leverage outside funding sources and respond to community needs. And the budget certainly supplements the capital reserves to support future demands for those resources that I'm sure some of the studies and planning that we're doing will indicate investment requirements moving forward. And always, as an accountant, need to say that a budget is a draft at a point in time. It changes basically once it's here. We've used the best information we have available, and because we are a month later bringing this forward, we had far more actuals to use. Budgets will be monitored, of course, against our actual results throughout the year, and any variances, our leadership team will ensure that we're managing those and reporting those within our forecast in the upcoming year. So it's just part one of that cycle as we move forward for financial management.
All right, thank you very much, Director. Does anyone have any comments, questions? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say it's a very, very good budget. It's very comprehensive. It's excellent. It's a really great budget. It's probably sounds very simplistic, but I know there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into it, so thank you for that, and the directors as well. So.
Yes, it was very much team efforts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that.
So I'm going to say, I'm going to throw a little ratchet into the mechanics here, and we heard that Police Services is looking at another position, and you did express to us that they are looking at alternate sources of funding. And so at this point in time, we can remain at the status quo, and then if we have to adopt, we move forward with that. The other thing is that as we move forward, and one of the things that I know that Councillor Gerard has talked about and that he brought up is with regards to building inspectors, and as we beef up our planning department with regards to potentially doing our own building inspections, so perhaps a study on the offset of that. The other thing as well is, as we see our planning department with a new director and our technician coming back, one of the things that we have noted is admin support for both planning and engineering, because just the amount of information that they're being bombarded with, returning phone calls and kind of keeping up on the daily, I'm going to call it minutia, but I don't think that's the right. I'm not trying to degrade what I'm saying, but just there's just so much. Exactly, there's so much coming in at them that having an admin person to kind of take those phone calls and return phone calls and let people know that, yes, we've received your development agreement or your development request, and it's here. So although those things are not in this budget, Are we looking at them, and will we move them forward? And do we have the capacity? And I know we've put the strategic initiative position, I see the CAO standing up. So I guess, do we have the capacity to do the business cases for these folks and then figure out how we could fund them and move it forward?
So Wanda and the directors would have got tired of me talking about a foundational budget this year, literally. But the idea was to make sure that the budget was representative of current staffing positions, as well as increasing monies going to capital grants and increasing monies going to operational grants. The idea is to engage council over the next few months on all of those positions you've talked about and establish where the priorities are. And then we can build those into the budgets as we move forward, because we're not going backwards to repurpose 60% of this position or 30% of that position. We didn't include it at this time. We did repurpose one position because we felt it made sense administratively, and we felt that it allows us to deliver on council priorities. Again, not a new position, and we did build in the position for Public Works that is in the union contract. But the idea would be to meaningfully engage with council over the next period of time to determine where priorities are, whether it's a crisis navigator, whether it's a min support for planning, whether it's building inspections, whether it's whatever. There should be two-way discussions before it comes forward at budget time to council. And we've created a space where that can happen and should happen going forward. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does.
But that was the logic behind administration when we built the budget.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Zabia.
Thank you, Mayor Snow. I have a question and then a comment, and I guess when I look at the revenue increases from the equalization grant or capacity grant now and the removal of the housing and corrections, was there ever any thought into maybe dropping the tax rate a little bit for those amounts? Because that's at like 350,000 or 345,000 of extra revenue.
And the CAO may wish to speak to that.
So those savings were almost completely negated by the increase in education
Right.
cost of $296. So yes, we didn't have to go looking in servicing for another $296,000, but service exchange didn't result in a significant net change in expenditures on any side of it.
Right. This, I guess, I'm gonna voice a concern, and this is not about people at all, this is about rules. When I look at the recreation department, and I'm gonna preface this right now, it's about roles and it's not about people. And I've read their bios and I've read this so many times and I've been in this town for so long, there just seems to be so much duplication of roles down there. Even when I read the descriptions, and that's quite a jump to add that many roles to a department that always ran, I think, on 3 people. And when we move ahead and we look at, we've got stormwater issues and we've got so many issues that we know we need money for. It's very difficult to even bring this up, but I mean, this is a business, right? This is what this is, it's a business. I struggle with that, and I've looked at it so many times, and I can't understand why we have a manager of recreation, and then we have a director of parks and recreation, and then I know we need a facilities operations supervisor, I'm bang on that. Then we have a neighborhood outreach program coordinator, and then we have an acting living coordinator. And then we have our administrative person down there, and there's just seems to be so many roles there that eats quite a bit of money up. And when you need, so much money for so many other things, and we've established that because we can't drop the taxes a few cents, even though we have that $350,000 lift that the director explained to us. And we're gonna have, the deed transfer, I know it's gonna go into capital, but that's where we want the money to go ultimately. I struggle with that. And again, I'm gonna say it one more time, it's nothing to do with people, it's just the roles. And I mean, it's like any business. If I am struggling at my business and I have too much staff, I have to evaluate that. And again, I have to put that out there because it's a business. Thank you.
So if council wanted to speak to the positions, it probably would be better coming from the director than myself, but, correct?
So what I will say about recreation is that I do feel like all the roles that we have, I cannot say any of them are similar. That can be the perception of the community, it can be perception of the counselor. I know each and every staff that we have does a tremendous job. We have built our team to make sure that we can continue to go with the growth of this town that we're expecting over the next 5 to 10 years. The new roles that we have brought in are already up in Oakdene, engaging community. They're working on EDI work. They're doing a lot of great things in the community. I understand the comment and where it's coming from, but as a director and seeing what these individuals are doing on a daily basis, I do feel it is a bit unfortunate that that's the perception. We have a lot of facilities that we maintain. We keep it to a very high standard. That was the reason for the supervisor role. We offer a lot of programs and development in the community, and that's why we didn't have anybody on staff that was able to sit down and evaluate all of our programs and continue to develop it to make sure there's a ton of programs in the community that meets every need of the community. And then there's myself, who is obviously the director and oversees the long-term vision of this department, along with your direction of where your point is too. So that's kind of my piece on it. I think everybody does have a value in this community, and these roles do a lot in the community, especially public facing.
Thank you, Mayor Snow. Thanks, Director, for that. And by all means, I'm not, again, it's not about people. I know that they all bring value. Everybody brings value. I just, for the last year and a half, we have had nobody in planning, and I know we budgeted for it. We've had a public engineering, which has been so busy, and there was one person there, a skeleton department, trying to run the whole town. And I mean, I appreciate all the work that they did. And then I'm not sure even how this came to be, because, and I know you've been here a couple of years now, but this department ran on maybe 3 people down there. And we've had some growth, that's great. I don't see where the growth is that drastic, that we needed to double the population down there. And I mean, this is nothing to, and I have to say it again because I don't want my words to get misconstrued. It's nothing to do with people. It's just like any business. When you have to cut back somewhere and there's too many people, and sometimes you have to look at that. And that's just a piece I have. And it's not only even about perception, because I know that they're great workers and they're great employees and they're valued, but it's a big piece of that budget. And I think it should be looked at, just in my opinion. And I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. So I like the piece where, I don't want to refer to her by name, but that position is going into the Strategic Initiatives Coordinator. I like that. I think that makes a lot of sense. So let's talk just a little bit about a community like Kentville and where it's at and the growth and the respective positions that you have down there. And maybe just talk a little bit about how it's maybe similar in nature to other like communities to ours that utilize some of those like positions. That might be a little bit helpful, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe that's too general, but.
Yeah, well, the Active Living Community Coordinator, so that's Becca. That's provincially funded as well. So
Yeah.
there is dollars that come in for that role. That's a very common role within many municipalities. When you're looking at communities like West Hants or Kings County, I don't know if they still have a full recreation department, they would have someone overseeing all their programs and special events. We also are one of the only communities that are hosting national events for the community, and that's a role that sits within the manager's role. For next role, the supervisor of facility operations, that's a very common role. If you have large recreational facilities, you need somebody to oversee it, and you need qualified individuals to oversee it. Roxy's role, the community outreach navigator, that is an innovative role, which I know, speaking to individuals at the Recreation Nova Scotia Conference, which they had, it's a role that you're able to get out into the community and understand newcomers coming to the community, what they want to see and feel welcome in our community, as well as getting out to the community groups that maybe some of our staff aren't able to get in contact with. So yes, there's a profile on there, you can go through all the things that he's working on, there's a ton of it, and there's a lot of it that he's already accomplished in a short time. And we're very proud to be able to say that we've accomplished that so far.
Thank you.
If
sorry.
I could add, and I don't know if you said this and I missed it, Director Langell, but there, if we look at our capital investment plan as well, there's a substantial number of projects that fit within the recreation and park side that are managed through that team as well. And I've been in Craig's office, and the wall is full of sticky notes of all of the projects that are on the go, which would be in addition to the general operations. That's fair.
Yeah, we had, so last year, for example, we had 28 capital projects that
Yeah.
we took part in and completed.
Yeah.
This year, I'm working on the hemlock conservation, which is a major project for the gorge. The conditions feasibility study as well as in there. There is a lot that we have accomplished over the past 2 years, and very proud of everybody that we have on our team to make sure we're able to complete all the goals that are set forth.
Thank you very much.
Director, before I go to Councillor Maxwell, I just, this naming of neighborhood coordinator, he's doing an awful lot of IDE work, and I think Councillor Maxwell really highlighted it. When she made her report at Monday's council meeting with regards to the amount of work that he's doing from that perspective, and maybe it needs a name change. Maybe that's not the name that it needs going forward, so that it becomes more obvious to folks what it actually means. And I know from a perspective of the IMSAs, so the intermunicipal service agreements, is that Kings County was trying to get all of the towns to buy in on their plan and their 2 staff members and the way they were delivering the service. And I'm also going to say that Kentville was the first town to say no, and that we had our own plan, and that we were actually working our plan. So, when I hear reports like the one that Councillor Maxwell made, it's good to know that we're out there and we're doing the work, even though our names don't sound like we're doing that work.
Correct.
Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you. Well, what I have to say is that when you look at budgeting at any institution, the first and easiest cuts that are made are to the arts, are to music, and to physical education or activity. It's easy to do that. That's what people look at. It's especially easy when the population is not active, when the majority of the population basically does very little to keep themselves physically fit. And I think that we need to understand that there's a direct correlation between a person's physical activity levels and their health. And we're spending dollars over dollars on healthcare, especially for our young people, but also for all ages. And the last thing that we should be targeting is activity programs, because that is our savings countrywide for healthcare. I think 3 people in recreation might go back to the day when I was the director of the swimming pool and still in university. We've had numerous people down in our recreation department for years. And there's been very actual little change in the number of people that are down there with a funded position of active living. And so I think that we have to take that into consideration. The recreation program has grown. It includes more than just physical programming for physical activity. It includes the library is under that umbrella. Housing was under that umbrella. Anything to do with arts seems to fall under that umbrella. So, I mean, it's a huge program. It's growing all the time. The outreach coordinator, I did speak about it at our last meeting. Whether people want to admit it or not, there are areas in this town that have been underserviced and made to feel marginalized for decades. And this position has finally come about because many people are now voicing that. They're starting to see that. And this position will help with our newcomer population. It helps try to pull in people who have been feeling marginalized and undervalued for a long time. And just to go up to Oakdean Park and see the people from the housing complex next door over there doing the gardening. And we have one of our programs in town with children that are feeling, you know, have been left out on the side, helping with that program. You know, everybody should be going up there and taking a look at it. This is a fantastic program. It's been decades needed. And to look at, you know, not having it would be criminal, in my opinion. It would be going back to those dark ages when areas of town are left out. Look how long it took to get a park on the other side of the bridge. It took my entire lifetime. I was in my 60s before a park was put up there. And so the last thing that I would want to see happen in this town is for us to start peeling back on recreation. If we did a survey of newcomers coming to Kentville, buying homes, and asked them why they moved here, the number one reason they're going to give you isn't that we don't have a deed transfer. It's the fact that we have a good recreation department with a lot of trails and a lot of activities. We have the biking trails, we have the mountain biking trails, we have the Harvest Moon Trailway, we have all kinds of sporting events. We have everything. I cannot sit here and let it happen where somebody says, let's target the activity program in the town of Kentville for budget cuts. No, let's look somewhere else. If this council wants to actually make a little bit of a dent in a $17 million budget, then let's all take a $10,000 cut in our salaries. Let's take our budgets, our personal budget accounts, and drop them right down to $1,000. Administrations are the areas where you want to target, not programming. And I can't speak highly enough for this recreation department. When Rachel was our recreation director, I went to some of the conferences. The name of this recreation department in this province is outstanding. There are no communities around us that compare, not even close. Not only that, but nationally, we're right up there with top national recreation programs. And so, you know, I would appeal to councillors, if you want to find cuts, let's not look at programs, let's look in other areas. And I have to say all that because of my background. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor York.
Thank you. To Councillor Zibian's previous, or to his point, that if it's a perception of just confusion of overlap or if there's redundancies, I know when I worked in the department, which again, a hot minute ago, but I was there, we did things quietly. And so they happened without fanfare in terms of like bragging rights and that sort of thing. But if there is a perception of dualities, then perhaps it's a moment to more publicly recognize them. And to Councillor Maxwell's point, we are known in recreation circles, absolutely. Not all of us are in recreation circles in terms of like attending Rec Nova Scotia conferences and those sorts of things. So perhaps it's a moment to clearly outline what's happening in the department, or more clearly or more loudly, perhaps, just to, if we're combating a perception, if it is a perception, then we can change that way, would be my recommendation, though I don't recommend anything. I'm not offering or telling anybody what to do, but that would be how I would combat it, if someone were to ask.
I would, I just want to mention as well as the role of neighborhood outreach community coordinator. It does not just serve recreation. Some of the stuff that has been accomplished by the role serves the entire department and council as a whole as well. When we're looking at the belonging task force, where he's working with our union for proposed language in Indigenous communities. There's a lot of stuff that's not just primarily focused on recreation, and it's more on community development if we really want to get into the discussion around community development and recreation. So maybe we need to frame ourselves as recreation and community development going forward, but I do think that, you know, building off of what some of you have said with Rachel in the past and taking us to where we are and where we need to go from here. I truly do believe that, and the roles that we have will allow us to do that. That's kind of, yeah, I guess.
Councillor Zabian.
Thank you, Mayor Snow.
Thank you, Mayor Snow. I think my point was missed, and I'm not gonna be redundant with it. We've always been known to have an amazing recreational department here, always, for decades. It's not new in the last year or 2 or 3 years, it's forever. And there was never a compliment that big down there, even in those times. So I just wanna make that clear. At no time did I say to cut any programming. It's just a little heavy down there, and that's in my opinion, and I'm entitled to it, just like the rest of you are. But my question to you all is, where are you gonna find this money? You've got a rink that you wanna put $20 million into. Where's that money gonna come from? If we're not spending wisely, where is it gonna come from? You just can't whip it out of a hat. So, and maybe that's not the only one you need to trim. That just sticks out to me, but there's probably more there. You know, it's great to have these ideas. We wanna have a new updated rink. We wanna fix the stormwater. We wanna fix the roads. We wanna fix this, but where's the money gonna come from? So, I mean, that's an important question. And the only other comment I wanna make is, I thought this was gonna be built in the budget, cause it's come up for the last 3 or 4 years. And it might have just been an oversight, or it could be in there somewhere else. The Historical Society building,
It's built in the budget.
and where's that at, just so I know?
Yep.
Thank you, Director, for.
It is in there, just one second.
It's Kentville Futures, but
It's
that-
called Kentville Futures, yeah.
Okay,
there's $12,000 in there, and it's to address the
Yep.
fascia boards and the gutters this year. which
Okay.
is gonna go look at windows next year.
okay, that's perfect. Thanks, CEO.
Yeah, so it is under environmental development, under other community development, down in that section. Yep,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Councillor Max, oh, sorry, CAO first.
Again.
It's his birthday.
Councillor Zabian, we're saying the same thing on future capital. If you look at this budget, you have the D-transfer tax that will go into capital reserves. You have an additional $3,000 that are going to capital this year. That, the way it's set up is that can go every year. That's not just $300,000 this year. We have fully funded all positions. The expectation is as we get lifts or growth in assessment going forward, there can be a dedicated amount that can, on top of that, start to go into capital. We know that if we're looking at a $12 or $20 million upgrade to the arena, that we're going to need federal and provincial support, no different than if we're looking at a recreation facility. But when we built this budget, again, it was to be foundational so that as we move forward, we weren't paying for yesterday and looking at tomorrow as well. And even on the operating reserve, with $450,000 surplus, we used about 200 and a little bit of that surplus from this year to fund what were one-offs, the stormwater management, the secondary plan, and the architectural on the town hall. The residual will go into the operating reserve, and as well, historically, we had used about 200,000 of that operating reserve every year.
Yes.
Just to cover normal operations. That isn't done this year, nor will it be done anymore. So we tried very hard to set the table for what the expectations are on a go-forward basis.
Councillor Maxwell.
No, thank you. I just have to say that when you run an organization as large as the Kentville Recreation Department, you need to have oversight on all those programs, and that's what those directors are for. I can make an analogy to an NHL program. So if you looked at the Toronto Maple Leafs organization, and you looked at what it took to run, I don't know how many players they run, but, 15 or 20 players, and the number of positions that are behind that in order to run that organization, there's not 2 or 3 people running that. There's a whole lot of people. And if we're gonna maintain the level of servicing with our recreation department, we need to have that oversight, and we need to have those directors that are there. So I clearly understood what the counselor was saying, but you can't run good programming on a shoestring. Thank you.
Thank you. Whoops. Counselor Zabian.
Thanks, Mayor Snow. And this is just a clarity question. Sure, you can answer maybe through the chair to Deputy Mayor Savage. The perpetual fund, we have to maintain 10 million there, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and,
Oh, sorry, I'm not speaking.
okay,
Yes.
okay, thank you. And my last thing, Director Matthews, you're gonna keep me on suspense to my question about what will 1 cent buy us.
I shared it. When
Oh,
we
did
talked
you?
taxes, 70, I think you wrote it down,
Oh.
74,
And what was commercial?
do not.
You'll let
have
me
the
know,
number,
okay.
but I can calculate it.
74,000, I must have been asleep at the wheel.
74,183, about
Okay.
74,000.
I guessed 71 this morning, so I was pretty close.
Yeah. Commercial's a little harder because of the industrial park taking out, but I could get that at a later date for you.
Thanks
Yeah.
for your help.
Can't do it on the fly.
That's okay.
All right, I want to say thank you very much for this work. Directors, CAO, thank you all for this work. This was a very comprehensive work, and I'm going to say that from my perspective, what I really like is the notes that you provided, but I also like the unaudited amounts of actuals from 23, 24. I could compare those to an approved budget and then compare to a proposed budget and really situate where I wanted to be. And I think I see some heads nodding out there, so I believe that we're pretty happy with the work that's been done. And council, as I said to you before we started, we have 2 choices. We can either approve this draft budget this evening, or we can move forward and defer approval with any recommendations. So before I move to a motion, I will just, I'll go around and poll you and ask you, do you wish to approve the budget or defer the budget? Councillor Maxwell.
Approved.
Deputy Mayor.
Approved.
Councillor York.
I would prefer to defer.
Councillor Zabian.
Defer.
Councillor Huntley.
Defer.
And I wish to approve, but that doesn't matter. We have, the vote has been carried, and we will put a motion on the floor to defer approval. And the motion that I had was subject to changes requested, but we have no changes requested. So I guess the question would be, why are we deferring?
Well, that's what sorry. So that's just my question, and I realize, like, it's a lot of information, and we received it this week, and we reviewed it, and we went over it today, but like, to defer it is just to sort of absorb it some more. I'm assuming that is why, yeah. So no real recommendations that are coming out, just to take more time to review it and read it, which I'm okay with. I mean, I'm okay doing that.
Okay, Councillor York.
Yeah, sorry, to Deputy Mayor's point, it's just a lot of information for me to take away, and again, I don't see any red flags, I don't have any reservations, I just want to make sure that with your comments and with your commentary and the meeting that we've had today, that I can go back and just answer my own questions. But that's why I would vote to defer. That's just me personally.
All right, thank you. Councillor Huntley.
And I'm the same. There's no red flags in here for me. But as I read it, how much more clearer now in my head has it been since I've heard Wanda's voice? So now I can go back and read, thank you, Wanda. But now I can go back and read it again. Okay, that's what she meant. Because I still have another 12 questions written down just while you're talking. So, yeah, and it wouldn't take much, a couple of days for me. I'm sure it would be fine, but yeah.
Counselor Zabian.
Thank you, Mayor Snow. I don't like deciding budgets in one meeting. I think it's not good decision-making for myself anyway, and I think people need time to absorb, and there may be something that may pop in your head. As soon as I go to sleep, something pops in my head, and then that's how I am. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
So with respect to deferring it, would we be deferring it until the June council meeting, or can we have another special meeting of council, or I just don't know how that,
I'm going to suspect that it will be a special meeting of council.
okay.
The CAO is away, and then there's FCM, and there's two of us away for that. So there will be, I'll say, a little time lag in this, and we will call a special meeting, and there will be enough time. The other thing as well is depending on where we are, because if anyone has a red flag, the recommendation would be that you send the question, CAO, do you want them to go directly to the director, or do you want them to go to you through her, or to you and her CC'd?
So I would say send it to me and CC the director on.
Okay, and CC so council and mayor, so that we all know what your red flag is, and those direct questions. And then from that, we can make a decision whether or not this becomes a motion in our June council meeting. Because if there are no fundamental changes required to this, as you've all said, there's no red flags. And we've been assured that the things that are kind of sitting on the edge of each of our desk are going to be embedded at some point when we get there. I think that this may just make sense for that. All right, so the motion is that council defer approval of the 24-25 Town of Kentville operational budget for review.
Would you put in there to the June council meeting?
No, I don't want to put a time, because if there are significant changes, we're going to have to come back to a special meeting.
All right. So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Zabian, thank you. It has been moved and seconded that council defer approval of the 24-25 Town of Kentville operational budget for review. Is there any further discussion on this matter? All right, the question? The question is that council defer approval of the 24-25 Town of Kentville operational budget for review. As soon as the TV warms up. Voting is now open. My finger's not working. Voting is now closed, and that motion is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Great meeting. Look at that, CAO, you should have taken a bet. Oh, we have public comment, but they're budget only. Sorry, the meeting is not adjourned, I'm sorry. We do have room for comment if we have any member of the public who wishes to make a comment. But I'm going to ask you that they be budget-related only. We will not entertain any other questions. Please. Name.
Hi, Mike McLean, West Main Street. First, a comment. I do have a point on the budget. Thank you for deferring, because although council may all see the numbers, you've had them this week, taxpayers, I only got a copy of this tonight. The notice only went out yesterday. As an operating budget, as a taxpayer, I'd like a little bit of chance to have input to provide my comments to any members of council. That's just a comment for consideration.
Thank you.
I would ask council to consider, and this might be out there in left field, I've been known to do that, under a one taxpayer thought process. As a taxpayer, corrections and housing disappeared from your budget. And I appreciate that Jeff and the crew brought back a balanced town's budget. That disappeared from your radar. But it's on all our radars when we pay our provincial taxes. So that's not a savings. I just have to pay it to the province now, not to the town. There are municipalities in the province that have considered that, and I would ask council to think about, as one taxpayer, that 170,000, I think is the ballpark here, that could be a correlated reduction in your tax rate, or at least some of it, because I still have to pay that bill to the province. Doesn't make your budget any easier to deal with, And that's a challenge, but that's a challenge every municipality has to face. I know of at least a couple that have faced that and at least talked about it. So I would ask this council, one taxpayer, that cost didn't disappear. It just went to a different level of government. So I think there's at least an obligation to try and find ways to pass some of that on to me through my municipal taxes so I can pay my provincial taxes. That's the theory of it, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Still gotta pay that education cost. Still gotta pay that extra $300,000.
All right, very good. There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned, and the time is 18:58. Woo-hoo!